All right, welcome to technical session number 49. Still kind of jumping around a bit. This afternoon, we're going to be talking about operational procedures. So stuff that kind of supports our IT. Some of the stuff's going to be a little bit of a review. Some of the stuff's going to be a little bit new, but we're going to kind of get into it a little bit at a time here. So our objectives, though, for this particular session are going to be to describe the appropriate safety procedures for different technical scenarios, apply the appropriate controls when faced with a scenario involving potential environmental impacts, summarize the process of addressing prohibited activity and content. We're going to explain privacy, licensing, and policy concepts, and summarize some of the guidelines for using basic change management best practices. Hint, hint, have a backup plan. All right, behavior skills and mindsets for this particular session. Going to be teamwork, as IT is a team sport. We will not all have the same strengths and skill sets. We need to rely upon each other. And it allows us to grow, develop, and cross-train as much as possible. Also, personal responsibility. If you're going to do something, if you say you're going to do something, you do it. Hold yourself accountable, not just for the bad things, but the good things as well. You have to be your own advocate. So, operational procedures. So as we're going to be providers, for the most part, of hands-on services like repairing, maintaining, upgrading, all that kind of fun stuff, we need to also be aware of general safety tips within the office so as not to harm ourselves or the equipment. So with that, it's also important for us to understand the controls to manage devices and power and incident response. We may also be involved in creating the incident response programs for our companies and designing these. For small to mid-sized companies, IT members tend to have to wear many hats. So this may be one of the things that we have to help develop for the company. Legal requirements. When we are faced with certain types of content, we may be legally required to report it to law enforcement. Just reporting it to HR may not be enough. That does not let us off the hook legally. And then maintaining good communication skills throughout the process. So during the session, the main things we're going to kind of focus on: safety procedures, personal safety, appropriate controls, addressing prohibited content, privacy and licensing and policies, and then communication techniques and professionalism. So first, safety procedures. We got into a lot of this stuff. There's a few new things in here, but we'll kind of review them as we go. So first up would be our ESD, electrostatic discharge. As a reminder, the lowest static volt that a human can feel is somewhere around 3,000 volts. A computer can be damaged by as few as 80 to 100 volts. You can ruin a computer with that. So we need to be aware of it. If you can see that spark or that shock, it's at least 10,000 volts. So we have a few different ways of protecting computers and ourselves against these kind of things. And they fall into a few categories. We have the anti-static bags, which most of your computer components will be shipped in. They have the foil or purplish grayish Ziploc bags. They prevent any of the packaging or when you're transporting or storing static charges to affect your components. I always recommend, if you receive components in these types of bags, keep a few of them in your tool bag. It's always good to have a couple on hand. So if the part you're replacing is damaged and you're just going to be throwing it away or recycling it or what have you, save the anti-static bag for it. Gives you a little extra on hand to help store and transport other components as you come across them. Next big thing, ESD straps. Not too bad. It's an alligator clip with a bracelet on it. That bracelet has a little metal button. The button attaches to, needs to sit firmly against your skin. And this is going to be used to equalize the charge between you and whatever equipment you're working on, to prevent the sparks from jumping from you to them. So ESD straps. ESD mats, similar premise, but the mat is grounded instead of you at this point. Also has a clip to attach to the device. They also have versions of these that are floor mats as well that you can stand on, but a lot of them are just mats like this that you can work on the table. They'll have a nice little grounding board attached to them. All right. So talk about self-grounding here. And this one is not really recommended. This is basically by using the grounding mechanism in the computer itself, because if you have a 3-pronged plug, the 3rd prong, the round one that you see at the bottom, that is the grounding prong. So it allows the computer to be grounded out. Not recommended, but if you have no ESD equipment, it's at least better than nothing. What else have we missed here? So we talked about ESD straps, ESD mats. Are we missing anything? No other options?
Is it also like personal items?
Well, to protect against ESD. So we had ESD mats, we had ESD straps. Is there anything else we can use to protect against ESD?
Gloves?
Gloves. ESD gloves. And then for regards to your equipment, in server rooms, they have things called grounding bars. So those come up every now and again too. So in the server room, they use things called grounding bars, which ground the server racks to help protect them. So ESD straps, ESD mats, ESD gloves, grounding bars.
If I wear ESD gloves, do I need to wear ESD strap?
No.
Okay.
That would be in lieu of. So we had a young lady in our class who said, I don't care what's going on. I ain't taking off my wedding ring. I didn't want to talk to her about, what can happen if you leave wedding rings on. But so she opted for ESD gloves above straps or anything like that, because she said that was a better fit for her. So. All right, let's talk about self-grounding. All right, electromagnetic interference. We haven't really talked about this as well. It's also known as radio frequency interference, or RFI. So you have EMI and RFI. And this is a magnetic field that will interfere with your electronics. Like we said, turning on a microwave will interfere with your Wi-Fi if you're operating off a 2.4 gigahertz bandwidth. It isn't nearly as dangerous as your ESD, but in high enough capacity, it can cause damage to components or erase data on storage devices. How do we prevent this? We keep magnets away from our computer. Simple as that. Things like fans, like those little USB fans and stuff like that. Those fans tend to be run by magnets inside the box. Also, speakers sometimes can be powerful enough. We don't typically set those on hard drives or something like that because they, especially older ones, have powerful magnets inside them. Avoid placing cordless phones close to your SOHO routers or your wireless access points. And then again, the all infamous microwave oven. The cordless phone one, not so much an issue nowadays because most people just use cell phones. Very rarely do you actually have wired phones, even in offices that use voice over IP to base phones and stuff like that. But rarely do we get into the cordless phones anymore. But almost every office has a microwave. And it's usually centrally located, which makes it fun. All right. Beyond that, now we're going to talk about natural elements. So the environments in which we keep our computers, we should never keep them in places where they should be in direct sunlight. Obviously, they don't particularly like water unless they are designed for that. Some procedures that we want to keep in mind: keep liquids away from computers. When I used to work in a cubicle, not my proudest moment, but we had corners in our cubicle, and if ever I had a drink, I would always shove the drink all the way back into the corner. So there was never any way in which I could knock that drink over and spill it onto my computer, because it happened all the time in our office. People would spill their coffee and water and all that stuff all over their keyboards. It was forever a thing. We had to have like a closet full of spare keyboards, mice, stuff like that. Cool environment. Computers like temperatures about 10 degrees cooler than we do. So average temperature that people tend to like is around 72 degrees. That is a comfortable temperature for the average person. The average computer likes it in the mid to low 60s. And then dirt and dust free is a good option, although sometimes it's not an option to have that type of environment, like manufacturing, warehousing, auto repair, all that kind of fun stuff. So they have covers that can go over your computers, filters and stuff that can be installed, all that kind of fun stuff. But we have to take that into account when we are utilizing equipment in these environments. So our next few slides are going to be talking about maintaining them, and then some tools that we would need to clean. So temperature, as we just talked about, I would say mid to low 60s. It says 68 to 71 here, but my experience and a lot of what I've read, it had said mid to low 60s. Humidity, also kind of like us. They don't like it super humid. They don't like it super dry. What happens if it gets too dry?
You can get a lot of static.
A lot of static discharge. What happens if it gets too humid?
Condensation.
Condensation. Things get wet. It's rusty. All right, ventilation. Usually, server rooms will have their own air handlers. Sometimes companies just shove the servers in a closet, but if it's actually well thought out, they'll have their own air handlers, keeping that air as clean as possible, keeping that area as cool as possible to prolong the use of the equipment, keep it functioning properly, and all that kind of fun stuff. Now, if you have larger server rooms, the ventilation becomes very critical. And the way the air is moved is also important. You will set up your systems typically in what are called hot and cold aisles. So when you're walking down a server room aisle, you will walk down all the fronts of the computer. So both sides of the aisle, you'll see the fronts of servers or switches or what have you. And then they'll put the servers back to back. And what will happen is they'll have the air intakes coming in from behind the computers, sucking up all the exhaust air from the computers. And then they'll push out the cold air into the cool aisles where that air will be going into the computers to help keep them cool. So all the cold sections face each other, all the hot sections face each other. So you have hot and cold aisles if you're dealing with larger data centers. All right, cleaning tools. All right, so compressed air is a big one. It's the cheapest one. It's really good for cleaning out a lot of computer components if you have dust and debris and all that kind of fun stuff. Periodically, we do want to crack the case on computers, just open them up, get all the dust and debris out of there because it can build up, especially if you have pets. Cats are the worst because they seem to love laying right up against the computers and all their hair gets sucked up into it and it doesn't quite make its way out. So compressed air works really good for this. Just need to be careful. Don't hold the cans upside down because you'll be spraying out liquid into the components and it can damage it. But it's inexpensive, easy to use, and relatively quick. Other things you can use, they have vacuums, but these are electronics-based vacuums, so they will not build up ESD. You cannot use a standard vacuum. A standard vacuum is going to have a lot of static discharge. So they have specialized vacuums for this as well. So air dusters, yeah. If you give a cat your old up, something, there you go. So vacuums, air dusters, stuff like that. Did have a case of somebody who was in my cohort, had a guy open up one and it was jam-packed with cat hair. It looked almost like a pillow. There was so much hair in there. They took it outside and used a leaf blower to blow everything out. Would not recommend, but you know, it seemed to work for them, and that was a lot. They're pushing out the air, you know, like they're just like little blowers. Yeah, they're okay. I wouldn't get them too close to the components, but yeah. All right, fire extinguishers. Some of us probably forgot about these, but these still are a thing. So we got to remember our fire extinguisher categories. So A is for wood and paper fires. This is typically a can with water in it, and or a pump that you would pump it up and then spray water onto other items. That's a class A. B is for flammable liquids. If you've ever had a grease fire in your kitchen, you know you do not pour water on it. You use something like baking soda, so it's going to use some form of powder to kind of take away the oxygen, or liquid, like a foam or something like that, or CO2, I think is what they usually use. And then for electrical fires, they will use a non-conductive powder that will put out the fire so you don't damage the computer equipment. I mean, there's still going to be some cleanup, but at least you can put out electrical fires with ease. Most fire extinguishers nowadays, especially in offices, are what are called ABC rated, so they're rated for all three. Do you need to know these ratings? Yes, you do. All right, questions so far? Yep. All right, cable management. Let me see if I find that picture really quick. You know, when we are working in rooms, when we're working in server rooms, we need to make sure that we label things properly and try to make it look neat. They have a few different ways we can do this. We can get it here. I grab that here. So which server would you prefer to work on? The one on the left or the one on the right?
Left.
Left? You think it'd be easier?
It looks that way.
Yeah, that cable management is crazy.
Yeah. So this is drastic difference, right? When the server room at where I worked at in transportation looked like this. I kid you not. Our IT department, when they came in, did not care, came in and just plugged everything in and left. And then it was like a year later, so, you know, one of the senior IT people came down and saw what it looked like, rolled their eyes, and then sent somebody down there to spend a day just neatening everything up. So it looked a lot more like this. So you would use things like cable straps. You would use pass-throughs. You know, if cables have to run along the floor, they have conduit that looks like a little speed bump, and they can run it through those conduits. You don't duct tape a cable down to the floor. They have a lot of stuff to help you kind of manage it, make it look nice, covers, all that kind of fun stuff. Proper labeling helps keep things neat, all that fun stuff, so you know which port on the switch corresponds with, or you know, or on your patch panel corresponds with which port on the walls outside or on the walls in the office. So all the ports in the office need to be labeled, and then the switches need to be labeled as well, and the patch panels. So always try to show good cable management. If you show up and you turn somebody's server room into the previous one we were looking at, how likely do you think it is going to be that they call you back? Pretty
Very
low,
likely.
right? Very likely.
Oh, sorry, I understood it the other way.
So yeah, if it looks really neat, yeah, they're gonna be like, okay, yeah, that person cleans up after themselves, they make everything look good. The term they'll use is they were more professional. You know, if you leave it like a disaster, you know, like my 8-year-old kid cleans up better than that. Yeah, very likely they'll call and say, come fix this. Yes. So cable management, very important. Always try to keep that in mind. Personal safety. So we'll get into each of these. I know this one right here stands in direct contrast to the personal grounding that they were saying before. Leave the computer plugged in if you're going to work on it. That is not a good safety recommendation, so don't do it. Make sure the power is off, everything's disconnected. Press the power button for 5 seconds to dispel the residual charge in the capacitors, all that kind of fun stuff before you crack the case and open up, put your hands in. Remove any and all loose jewelry. Gold is an awesome conductor. So it may not shock you, but if you have a ring on and you touch down on the motherboard and you make 2 points of connection, you can cause a shock or a transfer of current, damaging those components. So it's a hazard of the equipment. Also, it can snag you. Like it can snag your hand, all that kind of stuff. There's lots of terrifying things. If anybody's ever worked around mechanics or people who worked with high voltage electricity, what can happen if you leave a wedding ring on? There's something called degloving your finger, which is horrible. And then with high voltage, it'll melt the gold, and then the gold just kind of finds its way out. So not typically a good idea to use any kind of jewelry or wear jewelry when you're working with high voltage or any kind of machinery. So please take that one seriously. All right. Proper lifting techniques. Lift with your legs. I know you hear that. You may hear that all the time. Use your legs. Keep your back at a natural posture. If you have never injured your back, trust me, you do not want to. Because the first time you injure it, it's never the same. It will never be as strong. It will never function as well. So please take that seriously. I'm speaking from experience on that one. So you want to keep the items when you pick up close to your body, because you want to maintain it as close to your center of gravity as possible whenever you're lifting things. And in IT, we may have to lift things up to like 40 pounds. If we're working in a server room, the battery, the uninterruptible power supplies weigh somewhere between 40 and 60 pounds. They are not light. And unfortunately, they put them on the very bottom every time. So you got to get down there, unbolt them, pull them out, lift them up, get them where you need to go. Then you got to bend back over, put them in. So not fun. When you're lifting, do not twist. It needs to be a straight up and down motion. Keep everything on center line. Whenever possible, though, use a cart. If there's one available, don't be a hero. Use a cart and push it instead of pull it, for the most part. I know when you get to certain door ledges and stuff like that, they have those little lips. You have to get up over it, and the cart doesn't want to go over it. You have to get to the front and pull it up and over. That's one thing. But in general, push the cart instead of pull the cart. Don't skip leg day. All right. When working in heavily dusty environments, like if we're up in the drop ceiling, if we have to access HVAC units, if we're in dusty basements or musty basements, stuff like that, this stuff does happen. IT equipment isn't necessarily kept out prettily on the floor. They tend to store these things wherever they can. Sometimes it's in closets, and a lot of the cabling has to run through HVAC tunnels, drop ceilings, all that kind of fun stuff. And it is very, very dusty and damp and all that kind of fun stuff up there. So make sure you have goggles on, protect your eyes. Also, if you're going to be doing any kind of cleaning out of the computer, if you're going to be using compressed air and blowing debris out, you want goggles on. You don't want the 6-month-old food that is in the keyboard and stuff like that to get blown into your eye. It's kind of disgusting. So, take the extra couple seconds, throw in a pair of safety glasses. Also, if you're going to be going into dusty areas and stuff like that, if you have any kind of respiratory issues or you want to prevent any kind of respiratory issues, wear an air filter mask. Because you get mold, all that kind of fun stuff. Older buildings, you have things like asbestos you don't want to mess around with. So make sure to wear protection. All right. Questions? All right, appropriate controls. We're going to talk about safety documentation, handling toxic components, and managing power. So first, any type of chemical, any. This means hand lotion. This means medications, hand sanitizer, anything, any type of chemical, any type of cleaner, hand soap, all that fun stuff. In an office, you have to maintain what are called MSDS sheets. or material safety data sheets. And this tells you the entire chemical makeup of all this stuff. So basically, if you bring anything into the office that's a form of a chemical, whoever's the head of the office needs to be aware of it so they can print out the MSDS sheets and keep them in a nice little binder. That's in case there is a catastrophic fire or some type of problem, then they understand what chemicals they're dealing with in there. So this is any type of chemical equipment or supply that could cause a potential hazard. Traditionally, the manufacturer of these items will have essentially their own makeup of these, and you can just print them out and keep them in a folder, what have you. And they'll give you all the types of information for it. You know, its boiling point, when does it, you know, its combustion point, in what capacities is it hazardous, what type of chemicals, if it's mixed with, does it become dangerous, all that kind of fun stuff. The only thing it really doesn't tell you is a freezing point, because we are typically not working in environments where everything freezing is the threat, right? So we're more concerned with its boiling and combustion points, and then what chemicals it is incompatible with. All right, toxic components. You're sitting there thinking, hey, wait a minute, we work with computers. We're not dealing with toxic stuff. Not true. There are plenty of toxic components inside of computers and monitors. So many of the things that we have inside of our computers should not just simply be thrown away. Electronics should be recycled if and when all possible. Big ones would be CRT monitors. I know they're old, they're rare. You don't often see them, but they are around on occasion, and they can't just be thrown in a dumpster because they contain things like mercury in them. Only problem is if they are broken, like the screen is busted or something like that. That is a hazmat cleanup. We can't just take it to a recycle center that way. So that is something we would actually have to call and have a crew come out and take care of. Batteries. Batteries contain corrosive acids. So they contain things like lithium, mercury, cadmium, lead, alkaline manganese, all kinds of fun stuff. The most toxic being those little button batteries that you see in watches. Those should never be thrown in the trash. Of all batteries, those are the worst for the environment. So those would go to, those would be properly stored and taken to a battery recycler. All right, so we already talked about CRT monitors, toner. Toner is more of a mess than a toxic chemical. You can't typically use a regular vacuum because the metal in the toner will damage the vacuum, also get it kicked up into the air. Bad. The other thing is they have special vacuums with magnetic brushes on them that will help clean up toner. They also have magnetic brush bins that you can sweep them up and then put them in the trash if need be. So you can't just use a standard vacuum, and just trying to wipe it up with a damp cloth usually just results in smearing it. So toner is zero fun to clean up, which is why you got to be careful when you handle it. All right, power. So the main thing we want to keep in mind when we're talking about power issues is the uninterruptible power supply, or UPS. But there's a few terms we need to be aware of. One is a blackout, which is a complete failure of power. So complete failure is a blackout. A brownout is a drop in voltage lasting more than a few minutes. Does anybody ever notice in the house, like when you turn on some appliances, like a blender or power tool or something like that, you see the lights dim for a second and then they come back up? Have you ever seen that happen? So that would be like a sag, which is a short-term voltage drop because it's being drawn heavily somewhere else. But a brownout would be that over several minutes, and that can be damaging to equipment. Then you have spikes, which is a sudden increase in voltage, which can cause damage to your equipment. You've ever been in a room and seen the lights brighten without any interaction, just like real quickly, it's like for a second, you see it just kind of get a little bit brighter and then it comes back to normal. That'd be a power spike. Those can be damaging to equipment. So things like surge protectors are important. They're usually built into UPSs, but at the very least, if you don't have an uninterruptible power supply on your computers at the house, at least a surge protector would be recommended for any expensive electronics. And then, so longer than a spike is a surge. And that is a long spike, sometimes lasting many seconds. It's typically less intense than a spike, but it also can be very damaging to equipment. If you live in places with older power grids, these are regular occurrences. I'm looking at you up in the Northwest or Northeast. All right. So main things we want to use: battery backups for our servers, surge suppressors, battery backups, or another name for them, UPSs, keeps the system up and running even when power is dropped off, and likely will keep things up and running until generators can come online. Because sometimes it takes a few seconds for generators to click over. In that time, you could have a hard shutdown on systems and it can damage them. So UPS will keep the power supply going until the generators can come online. Or if you don't have generators, it gives you time to shut everything down properly. All right, surge suppressor protects the computer from spikes. If it gets to be too much for the suppressor to handle, then it trips essentially a breaker in the power strip. And then you have to come back and you have to press the little button and turn it back on, kind of like a breaker in your house if you've ever popped one of those. I live in an older house, so I've popped them a lot. Older houses weren't built for modern electronics. All right. Any questions on power management or blackouts, brownouts, surges, and spikes? All right. So incident response. So this would be a security event. It could fall into a bunch of different categories, but this is something that could possibly cause serious harm to your network. And it may, depending on the risk, would determine the speed and quality of the response that you need to have towards it. If you have a hurricane bearing down on you, getting data transferred to the cloud, setting up backup units, redeploying personnel to other areas if you have a multi-city operation, so that you can prevent a outage of service, things like that. These would be an incident response. Being in Florida, we always had to be prepared for hurricanes because it's kind of a fact of life down here. When I was working in transportation, we had a couple of hurricanes come through year after year. In my last few years, we had Matthew and Irma and all that stuff come through here. And we ran road service for the entire country. So if a truck, we had 1,500 trucks, we ran road service for the entire country, maintenance, all that kind of fun stuff. And we couldn't just say, sorry guys, it's a hurricane, you're just gonna have to wait. No, we actually had to deploy across the state. So like we sent one of the employees up to Atlanta, one of the employees went to Tampa, and then one of us just stayed and went a little further inland and kind of waited it out. And then we basically kept communication with each other as the hurricane was passing through and handed off the service as needed during those times. So we had an incident response in place and we activated it once there was a situation. Your companies are going to need to have this in place. So we'll talk about some various responses you can have. Not all of them are because of natural disasters. It could be due to criminal activity, all that kind of fun stuff. But general guidelines, you have your first response, identifying the problem, reporting it through proper channels, preserving data, and devices, all that fun stuff, documentation, and then finally chain of custody. And that's prominently when you're dealing with illegal activity. So we need to understand if we're violating company policy or if we are violating law. That's one thing, and that's going to play a big part into who the reporting has to go to first and what our responsibilities are legally. Because if somebody's committing felonies, and we just go to HR and say, hey, this person is doing this, and HR doesn't do anything about it because they want to protect the company, we're still legally liable. We become what's called an accessory after the fact. So, prohibited content typically falls into a few categories. You have exploiting people, such as sexual exploitation, violence, so on like that, and so on and so forth. Promoting harassment against any type of person or group. Containing or promoting anything illegal or unauthorized. Promoting racism, hatred, bigotry, or physical harm. Containing adult content involving nudity or sexual acts, not safe for work content. Violating privacy rights, copyrights, downloading music, going to Pirates Bay or oldie but a goodie LimeWire, just downloading, because your office has better internet speeds than you do at home, so you figure just download all the music there, then take it to the house. So violating those copyrights, contract rights, and then defamation rights. And as a direct result of a lot of this stuff, you run greater risk of things like viruses and malware of any sort. And then obviously never acceptable to impersonate anyone. This means, like, remember what I was saying, if somebody's going to violate the law or something like that, they're typically not going to use their logins, they're going to use yours. So on top of violating the law, they're impersonating you to do so. So the understanding is if you're impersonating somebody or you're logging into their systems rather than yours, you're not up to any good or acting with intent. All right, other things, soliciting information from anyone younger than 18 or being involved in pyramid schemes, junk mail, chain letters, and or spamming. So this list is not exhaustive. These are just the general ones that are typically utilized in most organizations. So once we've identified what's going on, be it prohibited content or activity, you have to report it through the proper channels. So if it is a company policy, then you report it to the supervisor, manager, HR, what have you. If it is a crime, then you need to report it to the supervisor, manager, whatever, and to the police. So, though in that process, you may also need to inform the legal department for your organization as well. So like I was saying, if it is a violation of federal law and you only tell an internal source, it does not absolve you of responsibility if that person does not continue to report it. You become an accessory after the fact. All right. Now, if we discover, basically we become responsible for a crime scene, we are obligated to preserve the content found until it can be turned over to the appropriate authority. So we have to guard that content. We do not change anything. We do not turn computers off. So you may need to commandeer anything that was involved in this. It may be a flash drive all the way up to a network server. The people may get angry at you for this. But again, if it is involving felonies, you are responsible. So would you rather have somebody angry at you or be in jail? That's what I thought. So if you're ever unsure how to proceed, you should immediately contact your supervisor. They should have an incident response manual in place that goes step by step. This is what we do under these incidents. And knowing what to do is extremely important, because what should be done is not a natural response. One of the things, like when I'm doing jujitsu, I often tell my my professor, it always seems what would be the natural reaction to something is the incorrect reaction. And he says, yeah, you're absolutely correct, because what you would naturally try to do thinking you're getting away from something puts you further in danger. Same thing with an incident response. Sometimes our natural inclinations, or what we may think is the correct thing to do, can cause more of a problem. So this is why you create an incident response plan. This outlines everything, and you can't just have it written. You have to test these things, practice these things. They have things called tabletop exercises where you sit down, everybody who's involved in the major incident response stuff, you will sit down and you will go over scenarios and talk about what needs to be done, who does what, when do they do these things. And then they have what are called live fire exercises where you actually will attempt some of this stuff. You know, see how long it takes to do these things. Make sure everybody's responding in the appropriate manner. There was a company I think it was like last year, Fortune 500 company, had this awesome incident response plan. They did live fire exercises once a quarter. They did tabletop exercises, having all the appropriate people in there. They had this jam up plan on their server. They didn't print it out. So what do you think happens when they had full system failure? They couldn't access their incident response plan. So that should have been in the incident response plan. We should have a printed copy of this in case there is full system failure. What do we do? Where do we go? How do we transition? Documentation. Coming up on essentially like a crime scene, we do have to kind of be, you know, criminal investigators to a point. Everything relevant to the situation should be documented, pictures, what have you. Many companies may have standard forms of documentation that need to be filled out with regards to the incident response, and the responder should be able to capture all that relevant information, be able to, you know, here's a list of questions that need to be asked, blah, 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 and look for essentially vital clues. I bet y'all didn't think you were going to become crime scene investigators. But it is possible. Next, chain of custody. This one is absolutely critical. If the chain is ever broken, then all evidence is considered invalid, and everything attached to that evidence becomes invalid. Legally, they call this the fruit of the poisonous tree. So if there is a break in the chain, you can't use it. It's no longer actionable, and anything attached to it is done. So it basically kills off the rest of the tree. So what it is any kind of evidence or data that is collected has to be documented, and its entire movement, who's in control of it, and everything must be documented and signed off every time it passes hands. So from the moment you collect it, you are absolutely and utterly 100% responsible for it until you sign it over to someone else. When not directly in your custody, it must be in a locked room that only that person would have control over. Think about it like almost like a police station. They have an evidence locker. The evidence locker is maintained by a guard. The guard is the only person with access to that room, and they have to come in, and the person has to sign a log, you know, who they are, what their job is, what they're looking at, what they're responsible for, and then they go in, and so the chain can be maintained. So in your incident response manual, they should have chain of custody forms in case evidence needs to be collected. Now, if you are working for a small company and you are made, responsible for something like this, and it seems like a daunting task, you can look up incident response plans for other companies and then take them and modify them to fit your company. You don't have to create everything from scratch. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. This is one of those times where it's kind of okay to copy somebody else's work. So you would modify it to fit your organization and your style and how you have things set up, but at least gives you a roadmap of what needs to be done. So that is incident response, documentation, and chain of custody. Questions so far? All right. Next, we're going to talk about privacy, licensing, and policies. So, software licenses. If you are not using Linux as your base software for your organization, you will likely need to have an EULA or end user license agreement with every version of the software that you have. Because we do not own the software that is on our computers, we lease it or license it. So this would be our operating systems and all that fall under an EULA. Music, movies, and stuff, on the other hand, fall under what's called a DRM or digital rights management. And this is essentially a system that maintains control over these types of files when they're installed on devices and they belong to the person who purchased the file, with the end goal to prevent people from sharing or giving these items away without paying for them. So types of licenses, we're going to talk about the open source one like Linux. This is software is kind of free and available to all, commercial software. So open source, anybody can use it. It may require more technical support than a standard operating system. So be aware of that. So if you have the technical ability, it's free to have the Linux equipment or the Linux software. But again, more will be on your shoulders with regards to technical support. Commercial software requires the purchase of a license to legally use that software. So we have two different types of licenses when we're talking about commercial. We have the personal license, which would be an individual one, a single user to install and use. And then you have the enterprise license, which is purchased based on the number of seats or devices in which the system can legally be installed. So personal is you get it for a single system. Enterprise is I'm buying bulk licenses to use on my computers. So I may buy 75, I have 65 computers, I buy 75 licenses. Now, there are different ways that this can go about with regards to enterprise licenses. You can buy one for each computer, or you can buy them in a way to where it only matters however many are active at any given time. So if you only have 50 employees active at any given time, you might buy 60 licenses or something like that. That way you have a little bit of a buffer, but you have multiple shifts, not that many people operating at the same time. So you operate off of 60 licenses. So that is the enterprise license purchased in bulk. Questions? No, just having fun, hanging out. All right, working with PII, or personally identifiable information. This is any piece of information that can be used to identify a specific person. This can be a name and an address. This could be phone numbers. This could be social security numbers, email addresses. So when we're dealing with PII, it is the responsibility of our organization to protect it. And depending on the industry you're in, regulations may require it. So like healthcare and finance have particularly strict requirements with regards to PII. So big danger with this is identity theft, which is a royal pain and sees no signs of slowing down anytime soon. All right. Communication techniques and professionalism. So when communicating with people, avoid jargon, acronyms, and slang when applicable. So again, remember we were talking about the types of language I would use with my coworker versus a customer versus a supervisor. If I'm dealing with a coworker, I'm likely going to use shorthand form language. I'm going to use more jargon, acronyms, and fun stuff like that because they're going to understand exactly what I'm saying. When I'm communicating with a customer, I'm going to use more layman terms and, explain things in more simple terms. Try to maintain a positive attitude. I know your hard drive just crashed, but it is a beautiful day outside. Try to maintain that positive attitude. And confidence. We've talked about this quite a bit in this course. We have to develop that confidence. Because if you come off as nervous or uneasy, they're not going to want to do what you're asking them to do. They're not going to be very trusting of you being able to fix their problem. So we have to be able to project confidence when we are asking a customer to do things so that they will be able to confide in us and understand that we have their best intentions in mind. We're going to try to help them as much as possible. Next, actively listen, take notes. Let them know you're going to be taking notes. Like, hey, I'm going to be jotting down a few notes while we're talking here. Is that okay? Try to avoid interrupting the customer unless they start off the conversation with, well, I got up this morning. And it's going to be a really long story before they get to the point. We need to, kind of keep things in pocket around the relevant information. Try to be culturally sensitive. Big example I often use of this is personal bubbles. In the US, we seem to have the largest personal bubble of any culture on the planet. I tried explaining this to a friend of mine and he was like, that doesn't sound true. And it's like, for strangers, we maintain a 12-foot distance. For acquaintances, it's about 6 feet. For close friends, it's about 3 feet. And to get any closer than 3 feet, you need to be an intimate partner. And it seems weird. It seems like a lot of distance, but step close to somebody and see what they do. Now, you go to certain cultures like the Middle East, they tend to have very, very close conversations, and that tends to make people very uncomfortable. If you come from like a culture like ours where we have a very large personal space. And so their view of us at that point can be very standoffish, rude, inappropriate, all that kind of fun stuff, because it's a very different way of doing things. It's a different way of communicating. So we need to be aware of that when we're communicating with customers, different cultures, things like that. Let's see here, be on time. One of the comments I used to make to my drivers is if the customer calls us first, we failed. I don't care if you are going to be 3 minutes late and you can see the building, call them. Hey, there's an accident at the intersection before I get to you. I'm right there. I just wanted to let you know I may be 5 minutes late. Because if they call you because you're not there, what do you think their attitude's going to be? Probably pretty angry, right? Irritated. frustrated. But if you call them like right before you're supposed to be there and be like, hey, I hadn't forgot about you. I'm quite literally just 5 minutes away. I got held up, but I will be there in just a couple minutes. Be like, oh, okay, no problem. Because you thought to let them know. You let them know that their time is valuable. And you understand that. Try to avoid distractions. You ever been standing there trying to talk to somebody, or like a customer service rep or something like that, and they keep looking at their phone? You ever have that happen? You ever been talking to one and they answer the phone while they're talking to you and do the infamous try to avoid those distractions. Maybe as simple as, if you see a phone call coming in, apologize and just say, hey, I got to put them on hold real quick, but I'll be right back. I just don't want to ignore the call. And then grab it, say, yeah, sorry, I'm dealing with a customer right now. Can I put you on hold and talk to you here in a little bit? We have to be able to deal with difficult customers in difficult situations. We had a whole technical session about that. Work to set and meet expectations, timelines, and communicate the status to the customer. Try to avoid, like, oh, we'll get you going here in about 3 minutes. Just, or, I'll have an update for you in about 15 minutes and let you know what's going on. Or I will follow up with you tomorrow morning and give you an update on the order and let you know when the parts should be in. And if ever that time changes, like if there's a delay in the order and it goes from being here tomorrow to being here Friday, call the customer and say, hey, it was on back order. They just called to let us know that the part's going to be delayed. Here's when it's supposed to be in. So set the timelines, keep communications open, let them know any changes. Also, in contrast to that, if the part comes in early, hey, the part came in today, I had an opening in my calendar. Would you have the availability for me to come in today and fix it? They usually will be elated if that's the case. Deal appropriately with customers' confidential information. As we will be on site a lot of times, we may overhear things, we may see things, and we have to treat that appropriately. If you go fix a computer in HR and you happen to see everybody's bonus for the year, you don't go telling everybody what the bonuses are. Maybe back up and ask them to minimize the document, save and close the document so that it's not accessible to you. Something along those lines. Questions? All right. Change management. This kind of falls under project management for the most part, but basically anytime you're making any kind of change to an organization, there tends to be a plan that needs to be put in place. If we're doing server upgrades, if we're doing operating system upgrades, if we're doing any kind of equipment change out, there's some form of change management that's in place. And one of the most important things about that is a backout plan. What do we do if things go sideways and this isn't going as smoothly as it should? We have to have a plan to set things back the way they were, especially when we're doing major changes like updating servers or swapping out switches and things like that. Or updating operating systems. We have to have a backup plan. If there are any changes to the plan, we have to address it with a change management board. That may be our supervisor for small projects, or it may actually be a board of people in much larger organizations, depending on the size of and scope of the project that we're dealing with. Questions? All right. So, ITIL configuration management model. That's the IT infrastructure library, and it's kind of become an industry standard for best practices in the documentation and delivery of IT services. So this is a place you can kind of go and look at things and see how what other people have done, how they got things set up, and try to model that if you wish. So this kind of gives you standards for setting baselines if you need to, configure and management, for tools and databases to collect, store, manage, update, and present information about CIs or configuration items, which are basically items or assets that require specific management procedures. So basically any type of equipment we are handling. Documented business processes. This could basically be anything that happens within a business during your typical standard days. But it should include things as like when people are hired, or when people leave, major events, things like that should be documented for both internal and legal reasons. So other things included in this would be how systems and networks are configured. How do we have them set up? That way, if something catastrophic happens, we have a roadmap to kind of set these things up again. Who is authorized to make changes? And the process to requesting changes. If we're not authorized to do it, but we want to request a change, like we have a good idea, and we run it by our supervisor, supervisor says, great, draw up a plan. So we need to have a process in place in order to request them, and how and when to replace systems, because systems aren't, they don't run for an infinite amount of time. They need to be upgraded from time to time. And we typically have an idea as to how long systems will last. So if a server has an average lifespan of about 10 years, we probably want to start replacing them at around the 8-year mark. And so we would need to have an amortization table to depreciate these items over that amount of time and build up capital so that we have the money in place to replace them as they get worn out. All right, risk analysis. So if we're going to perform any kind of major change, we need to perform what's called a risk analysis. What are the risks associated with making this change? What could possibly go wrong if we make this change? What would be the negative effects if we don't make this change? So if we choose to stay where we are, what would be the negative effects? You would typically use something called a murder board, where you essentially have a change item up on the board, and you would go over the pros and cons and see if it is worthwhile in pursuing this method of change. This is going to be obviously for large projects, not for should we get a new PC for Bob in accounting. We briefly mentioned this before, but depending on the size of the plan and scope of it, you may have a change board, which may be a group of people that will review all documentation, and they will be the final decisions whether to approve or disapprove whether or not the change will occur, or any modifications to the change plan that you've put in place. And then finally, we always need to have a backup plan just in case things go sideways and the upgrade or change that we are trying to make is not going as planned, or will not fall within the financial parameters, or what have you. We have a way to get back to where we are now. So a backout plan must be in place. Questions? Oh, guys, this is exciting stuff. All right, best practices for change management. 1, ensure there is separate document for each system, server, and network. Use ITIL for the configuration management, which is the IT information library. Document the need for the change. Why are we doing this? We're not just doing it because it's fun. There generally needs to be a purpose behind it. Utilize a change board for approval of request for changes to the plan. And every change must have a backup plan prior to initiating it. And the timing of changes must be considered to minimize the impact on daily business activities. Finally, once the changes have been implemented, a thorough assessment should be completed to assist with future change management projects. What went wrong? What went right? What could we have done better? Did we have an overrun on costs? Did we overestimate costs? Did we have an overzealous IT person who tried to gold plate everything? And then we would store this in what is considered our body of knowledge for the industry or for the company. And the next time we need to make a change, we would refer to this plan before we went forward with any other. Questions, comments, concerns? We are done. All right. By now, we should be able to describe some of the appropriate safety procedures for different technical scenarios. Lift with the legs, use ESD gloves, keep temperatures cool, moderate humidity, good ventilation. Apply appropriate controls when faced with a scenario involving potential environmental impacts. Don't throw batteries in the trash, especially those little button ones. Be good stewards of our environment. Summarize the process of addressing prohibited content activity and explain privacy, licensing, and policy concepts. And then finally, summarize the guidelines and concepts for basic change management best practices. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, revelations?
Why we don't throw those button batteries in the garbage?
Because they have very toxic chemicals that will leach all the way down to the water table. Basically, like Florida, the way our ecosystem is established, if you put a battery somewhere, like a car battery, and you crack it open, it will leach all the way down to the limestone, eat the limestone, and then in about 10 to 15 years, you'll have a sinkhole right there. So they can be pretty devastating to the environment. So button batteries, there was a nickel metal hydride, have toxic stuff in them. Please don't throw them in the trash. Take them to a battery recycle place. I mean, you can keep them in like a little container or something like that until you have enough, and then just drive by one on the way. You know, almost every place takes them for free. We have places called Batteries Plus here in Jacksonville, and they recycle batteries for us. Questions?
I have never known that before. I always throw it to the garbage.
Don't do that. Don't do that. Now you know, and knowing is half the battle.
So how should we get rid of them?
Save them in a container. You know, like if you don't want to just drive there for a single battery or like that, just use like a bag, like a Ziploc bag or a little jar or something like that, and just kind of store them in there. Especially if you're in IT and you're replacing CMOS batteries on the regular. Stock them up when you get a little, pile of them, then take them by and drop them off somewhere in your way. So just look up battery recycling, and there's usually several places. I think Best Buy does it, Home Depot, Lowe's, Target, Battery Plus. There's a bunch of places that do recycling of batteries. Like a lot of your big box stores will actually have a battery recycle place at the front of the store where you can just drop off stuff. Any other questions? All right.